Hi, my name is Louise Pitcher, and I believe that authentic cross-racial relationships are possible and valuable. Throughout my life, I have lived in 4 different cities in 4 different states, where the communities I had lived in had been predominantly white. So it's not surprising to find that I had grown up blind to the presence of white privilege and how it has major impacts on minority groups in our communities today. Even though I was blind to white privilege, it seemed as if I have always been aware of white supremacy and racial discrimination. I remember learning about the transition throughout history, from African Americans being slaves to reading Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, and finally learning about political actions that seemed to create the end to racial segregation. However, what they neglected to tell us was that racial discrimination is still a major problem in today's society. And looking back, even though I learned all about these historical events, I never really learned why it happened. Nor was I taught in a fashion that evoked me to see all races as equal. However, I believe that my unique circumstances of being able to grow up in a biracial family has permitted me to be more tolerant and accepting of other ethnic groups. Growing up, my parents had always made a point to teach my sister and I not to judge a book by its cover. Instead, we should turn the cover and take the time to explore the pages, because some of the greatest things come from places that are least expected. And as a young kid, I never understood the value or the meaning of this lesson until the day I moved to Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania, and met Sydney Hayes. Sydney was a member of the only African American family in the neighborhood, and little to my knowledge, she would become one of my most cherished friends. I remember the first time I ever met Sydney. I was walking home from the baseball diamond in the center of the neighborhood, and she had tapped me on the shoulder. And when I turned around, she embraced me with one of the kindest smiles I had ever seen and invited me to come play with her. From that moment on, we became inseparable. However, it would not be too soon after that I would experience the presence of racial discrimination for the first time and learn why my parents were so adamant on teaching my sister and I not to judge a book by its cover, or in this case, not to judge people by their physical appearances. It was not long after that the other neighborhood children seemed to become curious about me and Sydney's friendship. And as more kids came up to talk to me, they all seemed to have the same question. Why were you hanging out with that dark girl? Upon being asked that question, I remember feeling so confused and a little bit angry. Why were they calling her that dark girl instead of by her actual name? And did you ever try and get to know her before? That night, I remember telling my dad about the questions I had received from all the kids that day. And he told me that it's because they only looked at Sydney's cover. They didn't take the time to get to know Sydney. And because of that, they only saw what society wanted them to see. My friendship with Sydney not only created some of my most fond and cherished childhood memories, but it also taught me a lot about judgment in society. Today, we live in a society that judges you based on first glance appearances, and these appearances carry defining labels that are based off of preconceived and biased stereotypes. And it's because of all of these prejudice acts of stereotyping and labeling that we have created a gap within society, which has resulted in hateful discrimination. But thanks to Sydney, I learned that nobody is what their label says they are, and that each person has so much more to offer than what meets the eye. She had taught me that pushing through the stigma of physical judgment and breaking the boundaries on racial societal norms, that we can evoke great opportunities of happiness and create a sense of comfort that's only associated with acceptance. I can honestly say, if I hadn't gotten to know Sydney for who she was as a person and only judged her based on her physical appearances, that I wouldn't have had such a memorable childhood. Nor would I have been open-minded enough now to have met some of my most greatest friends on campus, who have made my time here at UW some of the best times of my life. I'm Louise Pitcher, and my story challenges the belief that we have nothing unique to offer each other.